Everyone.
No, but I said by the end of it.
Are we good, James?
Subscribe.
Excellent. Hi, I'm Matthew Gardner, Signature's Artistic Director. Welcome to everyone who's here. Welcome to those of you joining us online. We have an exciting conversation planned for you today. For those of you who don't know, I think probably most of you here do, but maybe those of you online don't. Our entire season here at Signature is dedicated to the work of Stephen Sondheim, 3 full productions, as well as a lot of ancillary programming, including conversations like the one that we're about to have this evening. And so I'm particularly excited about this one. This is Anika Chapin, who is Signature's our Director of Artistic Development, is going to be leading a conversation with her dad, Ted Chapin. Ted Chapin was the president of the Rodgers and Hammerstein Organization, and he wrote this wonderful book about one of his earliest experiences in the theater. And the book is called Everything Was Possible, and it's the story behind the making of Follies. So I'm going to welcome Ted and Anika up here, and we'll get to learn a little bit more about the fascinating making of a Sondheim musical. Excellent.
Are we on?
While I put the mic on, imagine that lightning is flashing and you're seeing an old theater.
Got it.
I think so. I can't see it.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Is this if something goes wrong?
No, I think we're using that as well.
Okay.
Hello. Hi,
Hello
Dad.
there. How are you?
I'm
Nice to
well,
be in your
thanks.
home here.
Yes, it is. It's my artistic home. I'm going to put this down here. Just like my home, it's full of random things that are in my way. And we do need to use this to talk while we're doing it. That's for you. Oh, now you can hear me say these stunning things I've said already. Oh.
Helps if you turn it on.
Oh. Just like the making of a musical, sometimes the making of a talk about a musical involves some workshopping.
Well taught.
There we go. Is that better? Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for the wonderful introduction. And welcome, Dad. This is the first time we've done this, correct?
That's true. That's true. We've talked, but but not in this formal setting.
Yes, we have briefly talked over the years. Right. So I just wanted to start my little questions. I have my hardcover, the original hardcover of this book. So my first question: who is your favorite child? No, I'm kidding. My sister's probably watching this like, don't answer that question.
Or rue the day you do.
Yeah, it's true. So I wanted to ask, before the book, how did you get into musicals? What is your musical theater origin story? What drew you to this particular form and made you think, this is what I want to do?
Well, shall I take that? Or
yeah.
Okay. I was fortunate in being the child of a man named Schuyler Chapin who had this wonderful career in New York. And when I was just at the age to make sense of what he was actually doing, he was the head of the Masterworks division of Columbia Records when they were making a lot of cast albums, and he would bring them home. And I fell absolutely in love with Bye Bye Birdie until the kid sang a reprise of Kids. And I thought, how dare you? You're a kid. But so Bye Bye Birdie was really the thing, and there was something about, and there remains something in that show, there's a kind of energy to that show that I just loved. And then it's the first one I saw on Broadway, although I didn't see it early enough to see the original leads. I saw Gretchen Weiler and Gene Rayburn. It's like, who are they? I don't know, but I saw it, and I loved it. And with other albums coming into the house, I just became sort of fascinated by this genre. And I think I've always thought that the energy of musicals is something that was very appealing to me. So that's how it started.
That's a good, strong start. So from that moment on, were you the kind of theater fan that a lot of musical theater fans are? Were you going to see all the shows, collecting all the albums, like having the playbills, or was it something that you occasionally watched along with other things?
I think I was a moderate geek. Things were different in those days. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have quite so many things accessible so easily. But I learned about standing room, that I would go down to Broadway and buy, I don't know how much it cost, $2.50 and stand. I remember I saw a funny thing happen on the way to the Forum. I was taken to it as part of a birthday party, and I loved it so much that I went back the next Saturday and I stood by it, and I did standing room. And years later, I told Sondheim that I had done that, and he looked at me and he said, "You missed the best joke in the theater, which is on the whole show, which is when he's on the roof." And I thought, okay. But yeah, no, I went to shows. One of the things that I like asking people who are nerds is, what was the first show you saw where you thought they're not all brilliant? And mine was a Buddy Hackett show called I Had a Ball. And I just remember thinking, this isn't very good. But think about it, because sometimes it's a very tough question, because as a kid you just love everything. And then it's like the one that goes, I'm not sure.
Mm. Yeah, it was funny when I was rereading this, and Pretty Belle was a show that I really wasn't aware of. And to think of like Follies, which is now this iconic, legendary show, potentially competing with this show that sounds completely insane. I was like, wow, this is such an interesting reminder that when you're on the ground with them, it's very different from the 2020 hindsight. So you mentioned Sondheim. When did you first become aware of Sondheim's work?
I think it was Forum, because the West Side Story and Gypsy there were other things about those shows that people talked about. But when I went to see Forum, not only did I love it, but I loved the score. And nobody paid any attention to it. Well, he's a good lyricist, but he can't write a tune to save his life, was the sort of buzz. And I was like, what? Maybe there's something wrong with me, but I really liked it. Lovely is the one thing I can do. And I thought, that's really good. That's really clever. So that show, really, I thought, this guy's really interesting. So that's where it started. And I did not see Anyone Can Whistle. I will confess, some people, more people said they saw it than filled the theater for those few performances. I did not see
a few shows like that.
And in fact, when my father brought home the album, I listened to it and I had absolutely no idea what it was. So I kind of pushed it aside. But then it was sort of preparing for company that I started to become really interested. And I had a friend from college who basically sat me down and played me Anyone Can Whistle and said, you have got to listen to this and you've got to pay attention. And I did, and I suddenly thought, whoa, wait a minute, I gave this short shrift and I shouldn't have. So that's how I became, a Sondheim person.
And who was that friend in college?
Well, it was a guy named Jerry Isaacs who unfortunately died of AIDS. He wanted to be a musical theater writer. He did, however, introduce me to a man named Bruce Pomahack, who became an extraordinary colleague of mine at R&H through the years. And Bruce was an early, sort of acolyte of Sondheim's work. And I have the gray hair. I'm old enough to have, seen Sondheim starting at the company and all the way through. Because when he died, a question that I asked people was, when did you get in? What was your first into Sondheim? Because I think it's so interesting if it's Sweeney Todd or if it's something Merrily, whatever, in the middle, when you get to look both forward and back. But I was sort of from the beginning looking forward. And of course, having seen Company, and it just was mind-blowing to me. That's, needless to say, why I schemed the next year to be an observer on the next show that these guys were doing, because thank you, Lin-Manuel, I wanted to be in the room where it happened. I just wanted to be part of that world. And so that's how I came up with the idea of Go For It. I had Go For It on other shows in New York. So I knew that was a place to be part of a company, to be there, to have minor tasks. I did learn what regular coffee in New York means, which wasn't what I thought it meant. But that I could do that. And if you're hungry and interested, you see it all happening. The way you don't really, unless you're actually there.
It seemed like you were doing everything. It was so funny as the book continues on. You were driving costumes, you were driving trucks full of costumes, you were taking people here and there, you were getting lunch, you were joining the mafia with Yvonne DiCarlo. You really
picked up on that.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely picked up on the fact my dad might have briefly joined the mob part of it. So was Hal Prince similarly a figure that you were tracking? Because I think it's so interesting now. We have these senses of these people as being these absolutely titanic figures of the American theater, like beyond human people into the level of, near deities. And when you're talking about being in the room with them, I wonder how much you were aware of the roles they would come to play in the future of theater. Did you have the sense that these were the legends of tomorrow, or was it kind of like these people are really good at their jobs?
I think the latter. I think these people are really good at their jobs, and I'm interested. It's a tricky thing to say. I know these guys are destined for good things. I did, however, I was reminded by a friend of mine from college that I had said of Michael Bennett, keep an eye on this guy. He's our generation's Jerome Robbins, and something's going to happen from him that's going to be fascinating. So keep your eye on him. So that much I did know. Part of what I found as I watched Follies emerge was that they were, because they weren't yet the legends they became, they were all hungry. They were hungry to make the show good, which, as you theater people know, that's at the end of the day. You get the ideas, you create the show, then you go into rehearsal, and you just hope against hope that your instincts and everybody else's instincts are right, and that the show is good. Nobody sets out to write a bad show. But, so that's what everybody was trying to make it as good as they can, and it wasn't based on anything. So it was all instinct. It's like, it feels like there should be a this now, maybe a ballad, maybe a scene between these two characters. And Hal said that when I talked to him, when I did the book. He said we were just operating on instinct. But it was very clear that they were people into something very, very intriguing. And yet, to your point about the production assistant, I was only going to observe, but then I learned that the show was wildly over budget at $850,000. Today, you can't stand on a Broadway stage for $850,000, let alone try to do a show.
I think premium tickets cost $800,000.
One ticket can be $850,000. So that's why it worked to my advantage, because they needed a production assistant, and they needed somebody to do a lot of different things, some of which were more interesting than others. Yes, driving those costumes to a Richard Avedon photo shoot in Boston. I remember doing it. It had to go in one of those circular parking garages with this van, and I do remember thinking, I shouldn't be doing this. Some union is probably better at this than I am, but we survived.
Mm-hmm. And so you had already met Sondheim at this point, correct?
Yes.
And you knew him sort of socially, or what was your relationship at that point?
Yeah, my parents were friends of Mary Rodgers and her husband Hank Gettle, and the Gettles gave this fabulous party, New Year's Eve party, which started on the afternoon the day before. Roddy McDowell had a collection of 16mm films, and you weren't supposed to have that. It was illegal, actually, but he would loan them out. So we would watch 5 films until 4 o'clock in the morning, and they were great parties. And Sondheim was at some of those parties, and I would have moments of sitting with him and complimenting him. A lot of people didn't compliment him in those days, and he was very open to it. And the compliments. Open to that? What did I say wrong?
No, I think it's just, open to compliments.
But also people would write to him, and he would give them his phone number and say, come, if you're in New York, come see me. And he was very, very gracious about that. He became a god, so he didn't have the time to do that later on in his life. But he was always very open to that. And even though he would say an opinion like, you missed the best joke in Forum. But I also loved The Boy From in The Mad Show, because The Mad Show was sort of the Saturday Night Live of my generation. And that song was just so cool. And when the cast album was put out on CD, I interviewed him, because, as you probably know, Mary Rodgers wrote the music, and the lyrics are written by Esteban Nido. Although early on it was Nom de Plume. And so I asked him about it. I said, tell me what Esteban I get, but so to translate it. And he said something which I thought was fascinating. He said, I was concerned, I was worried when that show open and that song was in there because it's a gay song, and it was 1965 or 6. And people didn't write gay songs, and I didn't know if I was going to be drummed out of the theater for doing that. And he said, luckily, everybody just took it as, with the spirit with which it was written, and that was never a problem.
In case you haven't heard this song, although I suspect that a lot of people, oh yeah, we're getting some nods.
Right.
But if you haven't heard this song, it's The Boy From ... It's very funny. It might make an appearance later this season at a Merrily We Sing-Along event. Am I practicing how to say the longest name in South America and the longest name in Wales?
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe. Might do that.
I'll loan you my postcard.
What's from the...
Of the train station in Wales with that entire... It doesn't help you pronounce it any better, seeing it written.
Wait, I should also say that my dad and I have a little unofficial collection of items from the world that relate to musical theaters, including Dad, who got me the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo postcard, because I love Assassins is my favorite, so I have that somewhere. So innocuous items from the world that relate to Sondheim shows are in our house. Right. Yes.
Discreetly,
yes. But you described Sondheim in the book at one point as intimidating. You're driving him and you find him intimidating. Was he intimidating?
Yes, he was, but at that point in the book, that's not what I'd written. I'd written that he was prickly. And when one of the things I did when I wrote the book was to give the manuscript to everybody involved with the book so that I would minimize people's complaints when the book came out. And Sondheim went through page by page, and he got to this page, and he said, "You call me prickly. Is that your word or somebody else's?" "It's my word." I said, "Do you really think I'm prickly?" He said, and then he said, "Oh, I don't want to put you in an awkward position." And I looked at where I had it in the book, and I said, "Would intimidating be acceptable to you?" And he said, "Well, yes, people say I'm intimidating, but I don't really think I am." But anyway, so prickly's a better word, but intimidating, yeah, he could be. But the thing about him, he was moody. We all have good moods and we all have less good moods. And you didn't want to catch him if you hadn't, first of all, if you hadn't confessed of a change that you were making or wanted to make. That set him off. He got absolutely angry about that. So you just had to learn to play it his way, and then he was fine and extremely generous.
So that must have been slightly terrifying, sending the manuscript to Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince.
They loved getting it. I asked those two before I started, "Are you okay with my doing this?" Sondheim said, "Do you have enough?" And I said, "I think I do." And Hal Prince said, "Oh, great. People always want me to write about the process. I just want to do it. So if you want to write about the process, that's great." So and then, I sent it to anybody I thought would have a strong opinion. And everybody was helpful, because there were a couple things I got wrong, or the way I described things wasn't quite right. So I think the book got better from my doing that. So everybody was pleased to get it in manuscript.
What did you get wrong? What are some of those things?
Sondheim, when he started to read it, it was at the time of the Kennedy Center's Sondheim Festival, and he started to read it and left me a phone message that said, "I'm starting to read your book. Either you didn't know what was going on, or you got some things wrong, but I'll finish it and then I'll get back to you." And I thought, great, that's really fun. And a few days later, he came down here and he called me and he said, "I think this is one of the best books ever written about the musical theater." I said, oh, thank you, thank you. You got a couple things wrong at the beginning. They're insignificant. One thing, though, that Bob Avian, who was Michael Bennett's assistant, it was very smart of him. I described a moment in Company that I adored, which was in Side by Side, when the couples will do a little soft chew. They do the man and the woman, and then Bobby does one, and then just goes like that, and there's an echo, and you realize there's no partner there. And I just remember it was so surprising when that happened, that it was just this wonderful moment. And Bob told me I was explaining it incorrectly, and he just gave me the words, and it's like, thank you, that, because he knew the moment, and he knew exactly what I felt, but he knew the better way to describe it.
I have to say, when I was reading it again, Michael Bennett is the character who really stands out to me as this almost like mystical figure of capability. I mean, and you're very generous with what he was capable of and how tragic his future was. But it seems like when you were in that room with him, he was the one that you were watching as a special creature of the theater. Was that true at the time?
First of all, he was the youngest by far. And as I said, I may have said it in the book, he was of the drug generation, whereas the others were of the drinking generation.
Which is a great line.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. I enjoyed that line.
Thank you. So he was closer to my age, and he was with the kids more, and he was very tolerant with the older people because he was a little impatient. But no, I loved his work on Company, the earlier work I'd seen Promises, which I thought was fine, but it didn't. I mean, I wasn't an instant turkey lurkey fan. I wasn't a non-fan. It just didn't mean that much to me. So watching what he was doing was really, really fascinating. Mm-hmm. So and what he did with Who's That Woman, taking Sondheim's original idea and throwing it out and replacing it with something even better, was very impressive.
Yeah. I also noticed at one point you in the book are talking to, I think Gene, you're talking to Fred Kelly.
Okay.
And you have this moment where you're thinking your reactions to what's happening around you. And you say something about the tension between Hal and Michael Bennett, which was interesting because I felt like when I'm reading the book, I wasn't getting a sense very much of the tension between Hal Prince and Michael Bennett. And then I realized, gosh, it's so interesting because when you're writing this book, you have your older self writing about this version of your younger self present in the thing, which is what Follies is about. So when you were writing the book, were you aware of kind of that you're creating another level of that same dual, young, old, different versions of the same thing?
Sort of. When the opportunity to write the book came up, I wanted to be careful that I didn't give a modern sense of, the sense of me today, and that I wanted to keep the voice to what was honest then. There is one section where after a run through, I went home and just wrote out what I felt about the show at that point. And when I decided to keep that in, and when I read it again, I thought, there are a couple things there I don't really think, that I either don't believe or I'm a little embarrassed about that. But I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to be honest to myself here and keep it, Ted, 1971, coming home from rehearsal. But I did keep that. And at the beginning, I said to a lawyer, I have these pages that I wrote the night when I got home after a day of rehearsal, and I would quote people in those notes. And I said, what's the legal position of quoting somebody from 30 years ago? But the quote came within 8 hours of them saying it. And the answer was, you can't libel the dead. And I thought, well, that's really not going to help. But that was also part of why I wanted to give the manuscript to people, so that, it is interesting that Sondheim didn't like Prickly, and Hal Prince had one thing he didn't like either, which was my description of the opening night party at the Rainbow Room, where I had written that he said to the crowd, the last time I was in this room for an opening night was Fiddler on the Roof, but this means more. And I think he didn't want to get phone calls from Jerry Bach and Sheldon Harnick. And so and what he described to me was, he said, it was because I'm the director this time as well as the producer. So again, not wanting to violate my own rules, I went back into that page and did a little description and cut the quotes so that I don't pretend that he didn't say that, but I gave it context. So.
And will you tell us the story of the changes of I'm Still Here, including the secret thing that we teased on our social media teaser?
Well, okay. So Anika said something about it. Well, what can we do special here? And so I said, well, there's a lyric in I'm Still Here that people don't really know. And there's actually a funny story about it because I put it in the book and I expected to be questioned by some Sondheim fanatics about it. And I wasn't. And the summer after the book came out, Sondheim called and said, "What is that lyric?" And I gave it to him. And he said, "Oh, that's pretty good." And I said, "Yes, it's good. You wrote it." But that led me to do something which I have not done since this book came out, and indulge me. I opened my file to the lyric that I typed.
Here, do you want to hold this on?
Let me just get it straight. Okay, here we go. So I thought I would read, since you asked me to read this. This is, I'm gonna do it this way. Okay, sorry about that.
Will you show us what this looks like?
Yeah, there it is. It's called, for you younger generation people, a typewriter. And I had Sondheim's manuscript, which had been played for Hal Prince and Michael Bennett and for Yvonne DiCarlo, whose song it was, that I was handed the manuscript up to the stage manager's office on the 5th floor and instructed to type the lyric out for the script in script format. So I'm going to read this. Some of this you will know. Some of this will be new to you. So I think let's have that much fun. Okay. I'm here. Name of the song. Good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here. Plush velvet sometimes just pretzels and beer, but I'm here. I've stuffed the dailies in my shoes, strummed ukuleles, sung the blues, seen all my dreams disappear, but I'm here. I've slept in shanties, guest of the WPA, but I'm here. Danced in my scanties, $3 a night was the pay, but I'm here. I've stood on breadlines with the best, watched while the headlines did the rest. In the Depression, was I depressed? Nowhere near. I met a big financier, and I'm here. I've been through Gandhi, Wally and George's affair, and I'm here. Amos and Andy, Mahjong and platinum hair, and I'm here. I got through A.B.'s Irish Rose, 5 Dion babies, Major Bows, through Heebie-Jeebies and B.B.'s Bathysphere. I got through Brenda Fraser, and I'm here. I've gotten through Herbert and J. Edgar Hoover. Gee, that was fun and a half. When you've been through Herbert and J. Edgar Hoover, anything else is a laugh. Good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here. Top billing sometimes the face in the rear, but I'm here. I've had it all, what folks call fame. Can't quite recall what was my name. Maybe it should have been Greer, but I'm here. I've been through Reno, I've been through Beverly Hills, and I'm here. Reefers and vino, rest cures, religion, and pills, and I'm here. Been called a pinko commie tool, got through it stinko by my pool. I should have gone to an acting school, that seems clear. Still, someone said she's sincere, so I'm here. I've been through shrinkers. They didn't help my reviews, but I'm here. 24 clinkers, even a dog would refuse, but I'm here. First you're another B.O. champ, then someone's mother, then your camp. Then you career from career to career. I got through 5 commercials, and I'm here. I've gotten through, hey, you remind me of who's this? Wow, what a looker you were. Or better yet, sorry, I thought you were who's this. Whatever happened to her? Good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here. Plush velvet sometimes just pretzels and beer, but I'm here. I've run the gamut, A to Z, 3 cheers, and damn it, c'est la vie. Third page.
Dramatic pause.
Yeah, I got through all of last year, and I'm here. Lord knows, at least I was there. And I'm here, look who's here, I'm still here. So, and of course, part of the fun is so much of that you know. But the way, first of all, the cuts, he made some cuts, but the way he edited his own lyrics without anybody telling him to do it, just listening in performance and just tweaking this and tweaking that, it's why you're doing a season of his work.
Yeah, that's so exceptional. And to think that was written, as detailed in the book, very much in the midst of a crazy rehearsal process with lots of things going in and out, and this is just thrown in there at one point.
And what I do say in the book is I remember doing it, just being blown away by these images. This was before Google. I mean, he went to his hotel room at the Bellevue, whatever it was, no, the Statler Hilton in Boston. This, clearly he wrote out ideas and ideas and ideas, but, that he remembered, but pretty amazing, pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is
I thought
very cool.
I thought it'd be fun.
Yeah. No. Part of me wants to be like, oh, Yvonne DiCarlo, let's talk about that.
You can talk about it. You can talk about anything.
Let's not talk about that.
I'll tell you what my the editor of my book was Bob Gottlieb, who's a famous editor and was the head of Knopf for years. And he gave me, what I took from his editing of my manuscript was two lessons. One, he said, don't be a pundit. This is a book, you're telling the story of what you saw, that's what this is. Don't try to pontificate. And the other thing he said is, if you had an affair with Yvonne DiCarlo, tell us. If you didn't, tell us. Don't be coy. I didn't.
But you did briefly join the mob, accidentally.
I squired her around.
So, since you weren't a pundit in the book, what now you can tell us? Are there changes that they made that you wish they hadn't made? Or are there changes that you thought that you disagreed with at the time over the creation of the show that now you see the wisdom of?
No. I will stand, and again, anybody who's ever worked on a show, you kind of want to stand behind which you were part of. I don't think the tweaks that have happened over the years add much to the show. They don't necessarily take away, although some of the stuff in London I thought took away from the show, cutting the road you didn't take, and make the most of your music for Ben and the Folly sequence. It's just sort of dumb. But again, to Sondheim's credit, he was a theater man, and if a producer and director of a production that he was excited about wanted to make changes, he was willing to do that. I think it was really fascinating that probably the last major production in his lifetime was the one at the National Theatre in London, and he went back to the script as it opened on Broadway, and it worked really well. And so it was, and I thought, you know what, he's right. He's right about it, and the challenge of Follies is the libretto, because the four main characters are not in good places. And even from the very first preview I remember in Boston, where a portion of the audience thought they were coming to see Ziegfeld. And they had to spend a great deal of the evening in a very moody, dark, and ghost-filled place and listen to people who had screwed up their lives. And then when the Follies happened, they didn't get the psychological combination between what these people were singing about and what they were going through. It's also why it sort of divided people all the way along, because people who get that are just like, oh my God, losing my mind. Yep, that's what she's doing. That God, why don't you love me? Oh, I do, I'll see you later blues is the guy who's having an affair and doesn't know what to do. I mean, it's Sondheim, it's brilliant. So I will stand by that production. It is interesting that since there are sort of three generations of people in the show, wherever you fit in those three generations is where you first feel. And then, as Jonathan Tunick said, when he started, he thought, these wonderful youth and those sort of callous middle-aged people and those sweet, dear old people. And then when he did the revival of it, he thought those callous youth and those sweet middle-aged people. So yeah, but I think it's one of the reasons why the show continues to be fascinating to people, because it operates on several different levels, including as you grow older and you think back on what you might have done in your life, what you did do with your life, the regrets, the successes, it's not tied up in a neat little bow and handed to you and say, well, that's the end of this. It's constantly changing and morphing, and your feeling is. And I think that's part of why the show is as extraordinary as it is.
Yeah, I loved what I think Bert Fink says, that you quote, which is, he says that the show is about leaving the past in the past,
Right.
Which I thought, that's so interesting, because I wouldn't have put it that succinctly about the show, but that's an interesting take on it. Just letting that go is an interesting lesson. But I also like what you said about different ages, because I've always found with Sondheim's work that he has a magical knack for that. If you track through his shows, like as someone who grew up in your house,
Right.
so unsurprisingly spent my youth listening to Sondheim shows, there have always been shows that I can't listen to at certain parts of my life because it's feels like too real. Like Merrily after college, I was like, no thank you. I don't want this lesson right now. And you know, on through. So that's interesting that like Follies kind of encapsulates that one thing better than the other shows. Since you've now seen several productions of Follies over the years, have there been productions or performances that you have felt illuminated something that was maybe missing from that original production, or that you liked especially that added something new?
Again, you know, I will confess my prejudice for the original. It was sumptuous and dramatic, and it didn't skimp on any of the sets or costumes. Any production that I've seen since, somewhere there's a budgetary pinch or there's something that makes it not able to be the kind of, grand is not the right word, but appropriate to the world that it's depicting. I did see the signature production in the old Tire House across the way, which was fascinating, and I liked that a lot. I did see in the Landor Pub Theatre in London that seats 50 people. And that was all about the lead characters. And if you didn't like their story, there wasn't much to take away from that one. So yeah, they're all interesting. There's none that I've seen that I thought, wow, that solves all the problems that people have thought this show has from the very beginning. And again, because it's subject to, you know, theatrical interpretation, and, you know, more power to it. Mrs. Goldman, James Goldman's widow, says that every production of Follies has lost the theater money. And I think the Kennedy Center one that went to Broadway may have just squeaked by. But yeah, no, I appreciate productions. I enjoy seeing them, but my heart's still in 1971.
All right, in a few minutes I will open up to some questions, but I wanted to ask you one final question, which we also teased in our social media teaser. At this point, were you living with your roommate, Mandy Patinkin?
No, I was not. I shared an apartment with Mandy Patinkin when he was going to Juilliard. Through a weird, I didn't really know him. I'd been introduced to him, and he said he was at Juilliard, and, you know, and he said, I found an apartment that you know, has 2 bedrooms, and I need a roommate. You want to come and you want to come live there with me? And I, you know, said, sure, why not? Anyway, but it was fun because I sort of introduced him to Sondheim because he didn't really understand. And we had a piano, so I would play things and he would sing. And the funny thing about that is, years later, I went over to see him one day, and he said, oh, Ted, go over to the table and look at that script. And I went over and I looked at the script, and I opened it to the page that was like, you know, blue, 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 pick up red, pick up this, pick up that. And I said, what the hell is this? And it was an early script of Sunday in the Park with George, and it was sort of his smug way of saying, I listened, I know, and I'm about to be involved in one of his shows. So yeah, no, and you know, I've been friends with him ever since, and I'm a big supporter and fan, and we had fun in that apartment, including by getting him his first Christmas tree. But I said he could have twinkling lights.
I love how casually you're like, yeah, I introduced Mandy Patinkin to Sondheim. Like all of us do,
Well,
you know.
it was the time and place.
Yeah. Will you briefly tell us, before I open to questions, for real, the story of the suit with Mandy?
I'll keep this short. When Mandy had a classmate at Juilliard who was the son of T. Edward Hambleton, who ran the Phoenix Theater for years, and it was Eddie's birthday, and his parents lived on the East Side, and he said to me, we got to save Eddie from his parents. So we went to my parents' apartment, where on the front hall closet, my mother had a lot of tuxedos and white tie stuff. And we outfitted ourselves, and we arrived at the Hambleton's house and said to Eddie, we have an evening on the town, come with us. So we left, and we went right back to our apartment and sat there and drank Jack Daniels. We had nothing planned. But we had all this paraphernalia from my mother's closet. So life went on. I go to see a preview of Sunday in the Park with George. Second act starts, and for some bizarre reason, I looked at this tuxedo he was wearing in the second act of Sunday in the Park with George. And when I went backstage, I said, Mandy, is that my grandfather's tuxedo from the night with Eddie Hamilton? And he said, it absolutely is. And it drove the costumer crazy because it wasn't actually black, it was very dark blue, and they had to make a pair of tearaway pants to match it, and it was very tricky. But why it even occurred to me, and why, of course, he would take it in the closet. And it was Playwrights Horizons. They had no money, so I'm sure whatever costumes they could pull out, although the second act only appeared in Playwrights maybe one night. Anyway, so that's the story of the evening of Edward Hamilton and the tuxedo. I have no idea where it is today. Maybe Mandy has it back.
You mean well, this is maybe a different thing. The second act, the one about the painting was only.
Yeah, it's in the modern. It's in the modern times. It's not in the old time, which is, I think, at the end of the Playwrights Horizons. I'm sure somebody watching or here knows better than me, but I think they did an attempt at the second act or a couple of songs for like one of the last two performances at Playwrights, but it certainly wasn't written.
All right, I'm going to open up to questions. We have one right here. Just say it and I'll repeat it on the mic.
Okay. Apologies, this is somewhat more of a comment, but I would love your reaction for this. So the two.
Wait, hold on. You know what? If it's a comment, I'm bringing you the mic. No, that's okay.
No problem. Sorry. Okay, so the two productions that I've seen of Follies were the Kennedy Center, and then since I couldn't get to London, the streaming one that they did it in the theaters of that. And the biggest difference that hit me is the experience of that. Obviously, they took out the intermission in London for this latest production. And for me, I'm sitting there going, oh, now I get it. So I'm just wondering if you have any feelings about whether Follies does work better as the way they did it there with no intermission versus, because I was at Act 2 with the Kennedy Center, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on.
That's interesting.
Wait, hold on, let me get the mic.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
The original creators played around with an intermission and ultimately decided that they would play it in one act. I think you're right. It's sort of not tone poem isn't the right phrase, but there's something about the show that does kind of have an arc that doesn't have a logical stop. I do say in the book that in New York, the first 4 previews, they put the intermission in different places with different situations, something that you couldn't possibly do today because of the computers. And those are just like, we're going to call that cue earlier, we're going to call that cue later, and everybody would do it. So I do think without an intermission plays better. It needs to sparkle, however, because that makes for a fairly long. I can't remember what the timing was, but I'm not surprised that coming in for a second act, and it's like, because it's usually the right girl that starts the second act, and that's an odd piece to start a second act with.
All right, question right in front.
So I saw the scene waiting for the girls upstairs and how it was, done with the two, like having the balcony and then the main area. So in terms of the set, how did you kind of think about having like the different generations shown through the set?
The question was about the girls upstairs specifically and having the two generations on the set and how that worked out with the two generations shown on the set.
In the original production, it was Hal Prince who had the idea that the ghost figures of the leading characters would be on the stage, sort of haunting the stage. And it's also what prompted the moment of, as he referred to as a group nervous breakdown before the Follies sequence at the end, when the people in the present confront the people in the past, and suddenly the time has been broken. So now we're all in this weird world where we don't have any idea where we actually are. So that said, the song Waiting for the Girls Upstairs was very carefully done so that it starts with the people in the present, and then it conjures up those characters as ghost figures. All of them in the original production were costumed in black and white clothing. So that it was going on in sort of 2 different time frames, but they never interacted. So they were happening at the same time, and it was beautifully staged to make it very clear that they actually were, as was the dance of Who's That Woman, where they actually danced together around in a circle, but it was a ghost, a present day, a ghost, a present day. And again, because of the black and whiteness of the costumes, what you would see is all the figures in the original production at the party were in colors, because the ghosts were all in black and white. The band that was upstage, they were in tuxedos, but everybody at the party was in either dark plum or dark blue. So that you would see, the notion that the ghosts were existing at the same time, but in a very different time frame, was very exciting. And that's the way they made it work. And of course, that's one of the first songs written for the show, when the show was called The Girls Upstairs, which Hal Prince thought sounded like a bunch of hookers.
All right, we have some questions online.
This question is curious to know if, Ted, your favorite Sondheim character has changed over time, or is there one consistent character that has always been your favorite?
Hey, God, really? Well, let me answer that slightly sashaying to the side and say that I'm blown away by how many interpretations of Mrs. Lovett can actually work. I will confess that I said to Mandy fairly recently, I said, I'm going to say something to you, you don't like hearing this, but I'm going to say it anyways, that Mrs. Lovett, I never would have thought that performance by Angela Lansbury was mind-blowing. And I never thought people could do anything, comparable or, make sense out of it. And I've seen many, many fascinating ones. And I said to Mandy, every time I've seen Sunday in the Park with George, somebody's doing an imitation of you. And he said to me something which I thought was really sort of revealing. He said, oh, it's very simple, Japes, very simple. Everybody doing that show now, people playing George, are doing a performance that they've sculpted. I was doing Mandy. And to me, what that means is, it was a new show. If you read James Lapine's wonderful book about it, both Mandy and Bernadette got their 11 o'clock numbers the day before the critics came in, having worked on the show for a year. So you don't have a lot of time to figure out, my attitude for this is going to be this. No, it's like he was saying, I got it, I learned it, I did it. I just thought that was very interesting in terms of people who originate roles. And also Sondheim was very, very good about writing for people. I'm Still Here was written very much for Yvonne DiCarlo. And my little theory about it was that he knew, even though he always said it was about Joan Crawford, I think Sondheim was smart enough to know that Yvonne would probably never get that it really was as much about her as about Joan Crawford. And therefore, she would sing it with great pathos because there was no attitude towards it. She was playing the character and singing the songs, but Yvonne DiCarlo's career wasn't too far different from what that was all about. And he was brilliant that way.
All right, let's go back there.
So Sondheim would often talk about how he would steal from his librettists, or from his playwrights. With Follies, I don't see very many instances where Sondheim describes and James Goldman wrote this, and that's how this became this particular song. Since you had so much interaction with the text of the show, did you see any of that sort of process happening where James Goldman would write something that would wind up in a song really beautifully?
Do you need me to repeat that, or is it? Yeah. Okay, the question was about Sondheim often sort of taking from his librettists and turning that into a song, but it didn't sound like Sondheim had done that a lot in Follies.
The one time I remember, and I almost remember the lines, Yvonne DiCarlo had a line, used to be something, now I'm some hot-pantsed mother stinko by my swimming pool and all my kids are acid heads. And so that became the line, and he stole that for the stinko by my pool in I'm Still Here. That's the one I remember. But again, I don't know of any other stuff. Also, Goldman almost underwrote the libretto of Follies. There were never pages and pages and pages, because that's, I think, where Sondheim really did tend to take from his librettists, and he encouraged that. I know he's talked about that with John Weidman. Please write the scene, just write it. Just spew it out. And then he would look at it and think, oh, I'll take that. But Follies was fairly sparse that way. But yeah, that was one line that I thought, oh, good for you.
Let's take another one from online.
What is your favorite song from the show, and is Follies your favorite Sondheim show?
The question is, what is the favorite song, and is Follies the favorite Sondheim show?
I think, yes, it's my favorite Sondheim show. I have favorite Sondheim productions, separate and apart from shows, like the original production of Company, which, with all due respect to everything that's happened since, nothing's come anywhere near that production for me. It just hit me between the eyes. Songs. It's funny. I love Waiting for the Girls Upstairs. There's something about that song that I just think is so cool. It also, musically, one of the things about Follies is because it takes place in the era and in the area of many kinds of musical theater from history, Sondheim was attracted to writing homages. So there are melodies, there are tunes by his own admission, this is a Harold Arlen song, this is a Sigmund Romberg song, this is a Rodgers and Hammerstein song. So those songs I find very appealing. The fact that Waiting for the Girls Upstairs has one foot in that world and one foot in the Sondheim finding my own voice world, in which I would put the Road You Didn't Take and other songs and Follies that are sort of more on the way to his finding his own unique voice. But I love the dichotomy in Waiting for the Girls Upstairs. I just think it's great.
Well, that's such a good point about pastiche, finding his own voice. All right, question right here.
Jason Moore, when I first started working for him as an assistant and associate director, gifted me Everything Is Possible. And I have since gifted the book as a director in my own right to either other assistants, associates, or students that I've taught. Do you have any other recommendations of books that have done for you what your book has done for us?
So the question was, it was a very nice compliment about the book being given, specifically to directors and assistants, and are there recommendations of other books that are in that world?
Well, when the book came out, people cited Act One as a book that was very much about a life in the theater that was important. I would add James Lapine's book on Sunday in the Park with George. And it's funny because when I wrote Sondheim complimenting him on James's book, he said every bookshelf of a musical theater enthusiast should have your book at one end and James's book at the other end. So I would say that. In terms of diving into the inside of musicals. There are other fun books. There's a fun book. I have this limited shelf of books about musicals. The Making of No No Nanette is a kind of cheap, fun book to read. And the Scarlet Letters about a musical version of Gone with the Wind done in Japan. They're fun, but I think, the compliments that I've gotten about just, really being able to get a sense of what was going on, people working very hard, got instinct guiding them, figuring out how to get along with their collaborators, all of that stuff. I think James's book is remarkable in that way, so I would cite that.
And I would just add Jack Vertel's book, The Secret Life of the American Musical, is also a really excellent choice. All right, let's take another online one.
Since Follies was originally conceived as a murder mystery, and Sondheim is famously obsessed with them, do you feel that there are traces of that still in the show?
The question is, since Follies was originally conceived as a murder mystery, and Sondheim famously loved puzzles and murder mysteries, is there any trace of that still in the show?
Very good question. Very good question. Tough answer. I don't think so. When he described what they were trying for in The Girls Upstairs was a who will do it rather than a who done it. And I think that became complicated to figure out if it's who will do it, what might the consequences be, and how do you get out of the puzzle and go somewhere that's interesting. And I think that was dropped fairly early on. The show did not move forward to production until Hal Prince took it over. And I think the addition of the layer of the ghost figure, and also, frankly, what Boris Aronson set, gave the show a character that the earlier scripts of the Girls Upstairs they're tough reads, and they weren't produced. I mean, there were several attempts, so it really took. And of course, one of the things I always love is, Steve wanted Hal to do it, and Hal said to him, I want you to do Company. I have this idea of taking these plays, unrelated plays, and making them into a musical. And apparently Steve said, all right, okay, I'll do that for you if, once I've done that for you, you'll do Girls Upstairs for me. So we should all be so lucky to have both of those shows coming at that time.
And side note, you make an appearance in the documentary about the filming of the Company album. If you haven't seen Original Cast Album Company, and watch it again and notice there's a lurking man in the back. How did you end up there? That was before the Follies, right?
Yes, it was. It was before Follies. Yes, I have too much hair. And I mean, the one thing that I think is fascinating is that I'm not aware of there being a camera there, nor is anybody. Unless, actually, that's not true. One of my appearances is when the filmmaker is interviewing Hal Prince, who's sitting in front of me. I loved Company so much that I wanted to be in the room where it happened. I wanted to be at the recording session because I love recording sessions. So I asked my father if he would call Tom Shepard and see if I could just go. And I'd been to that studio before on Columbia Records, wonderful, wonderful recording studio on East 30th Street. So that's why I was there. So, and you will note if you watch the whole thing, I don't stay long. I'm not there in the meltdown of Elaine Stritch. But actually, the last time I watched it, I wanted somebody, and I can't do this, to figure out who everybody else. There are other people lurking in the back. Judy Prince is one that you can identify, and I think Larry Cohen, who was actually lurking on Follies as well. But there are people there. I have no idea who they are. I mean, Jonathan Tunick may know, but it'd be fun at some point, before another parody is done, of somebody to go back and say, how do we do that? But then I will put in this plug, I was asked to do a film, a Q&A with Jonathan Tunick on the new edition of that Pennybaker film, which was a lot of fun and it's pretty good. It's on the Criterion collection of it. I started by asking, my first question to Jonathan Tunick is, okay, Jonathan, what's an orchestra? It's a good starting place.
I love the idea of those secret musical theater lurkers. Who are they? I lurked on the recording of the album of Boys from Syracuse from Encore, so I make a brief appearance on one of the tracks because they let go of the ensemble. Slightly less iconic, perhaps, than the recording of the original Company album, but whatever. All right, do we have any more online? Yeah?
How much did you keep in touch with Sondheim, and what do you think his perception was of his overall accomplishments?
The question was, did Dad keep in touch with Sondheim, and what was his impression of his overall accomplishments?
I did keep in touch with him. When I ran Rodgers and Hammerstein, we actually had a music publishing company with him, which, for all we hear about Richard Rodgers and Steve Sondheim having a bad relationship, it was after Oscar Hammerstein died that this publishing company was established called Birth and Music, which has all his early stuff in it. So there was some business stuff that I had with him. Occasionally we would share gossip. I asked him a question in email one day. I said, okay, we're having a conversation at the office. You great man, can answer it, which is, are the collection of words that put together with a very specific bunch of music together is called a song? Are those words called the lyrics or a lyric? And I said, neither you nor Oscar Hammerstein are any help because on the sheet music it says words by. He wrote me this hysterical response. He was clearly having a bad Jerry Herman day because every example he used about what you would or wouldn't say was, the lyrics by Jerry Herman were banal and, and I just thought it was very funny. Now that since they're both not here anymore, I can say that. But so he had a good sense of humor, and he as he became the god that he wrote about in Sondheim on Sondheim, many, many more people were after him. So if I had to talk to him, I would always call and say to his wonderful assistant, Steve Clark, I have need for a word with the great man whenever he has a moment. And rarely he would say, hold on a second, he's right here, or I keep called back. Because I always figured when Sondheim called me, whatever mood I was in, switch to his mood. You get the best out of him that way. So yeah, no, he was fine. And actually, I kind of turned the tables on you.
I don't know, can you?
The gobbledygook. Anika wrote something, and I sent it to Steve, and his response, which is framed in her bedroom.
No, you can't make me say it. You have to say it.
Her blog was called Bloggledygook, whatever.
Yes,
Anyway,
my blog was called Bloggledygook.
What was sent to him, he complimented her a lot and said, tell Anika that if I were heterosexual, I would marry her. I gather that's not the only time he said that, but he said it through something she had written. So bravo to you.
Well, thank you. Yes, and he was very tickled by the name Bloggledygook, which I think is what prompted that. And the piece was because
Assassins?
we both wrote about Assassins, because Assassins is my #1 show that I love and teach, and Dad was instrumental in it kind of coming into the world. So we both wrote a piece about each side of that. So we've worked on Sondheim pieces before. Okay, I think we're almost at the end, but maybe we have a few more. Okay, no. That is the end. I think we should end there. And I say thank you so much. Oh, wait. It's not the end. Because now, if you have your Everything is Possible book, you can also listen to it, narrated by the dulcet tones of who?
Jonathan Groff.
Jonathan Groff has narrated the audiobook. So if you want to listen to Jonathan Groff's beautiful voice, as you imagine this all coming alive in front of you, you can do that. So get the audiobook, buy the books in the back, he'll sign them. And let's all keep talking about Sondheim.
Okay.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.